Hey, everybody. So here's the deal. I'm on quarantine. You're in quarantine. I'm going to tell you my opinion. You're going to be very interested. All right, ready? Go. So, the USS Theodore Roosevelt. A lot of opinions running around on this. And I want to give you a little kind of background as far as why this captain would write this 5-page letter and put it somewhere where everyone could get their hands on it and basically leak it by putting it out into the general population. There was like 30 people CC'd on that email, but he knew that it was explosive, it was going to get out, and he got the effect that he wanted. So why would he do that? So one of the things to consider about a lot of misconceptions as far as what the military is supposed to be doing on any given day is that you kind of have this sphere of combat where, yes, if you're actively engaged in hostilities, you kind of power through anything. And he said that in his letter. If we have to go to war sick, we go to war sick. It is what it is. Outside of that, though, you have this basically permanent state of training where even if you're operationally deployed or you're doing, something at your home station, you're out at sea, you're in some foreign country, whatever you're doing, if you're not engaged in something, you're essentially in this quasi state of training at all times. And one of the things that the military looks at a lot is training accidents. A lot of people die in training accidents because the shit is dangerous. So to give you some perspective on that, in 1980, 1,556 military personnel died in training accidents. No hostilities, nothing going on, just died in training. When I got into the military in the mid-90s, and this was after a huge push towards safety had kind of gone underway, even then, we had around 500 deaths a year just in random training accidents. And I mean random as in like one time I was at Fort Polk, which is in Louisiana. There was an armored personnel carrier that was stuck in the mud. It was about 100 feet behind me. It was stuck in the mud, and the people who were trying to get it out of the mud stopped paying attention, started talking to each other. It got unstuck and ran them over. So those two were splat immediately, like instant death. That sort of thing used to be really common in the military because it wasn't really focused on anything other than the mission. Like it used to be very basically about powering through, being hard more than smart, and you would get all kinds of stupid people with very dangerous equipment that would blow each other up, run each other over, crash, set themselves on fire, all kinds of terrible things. So the military cracked down on it, and they forced onto the officer corps, which eventually forced onto the NCO corps, stricter and stricter safety guidelines. So that number went from around 1,500 a year in 1980 to more like 500 in the 90s. Even in the mid-2000s, there's still a lot of high-intensity training going on. It got lower and lower, it got under 500s. In 2018, there were 80. So the entire philosophy of the military as far as how you assess risk in non-combat situations has changed dramatically over 2 generations, to the point now where all operations that are not basically directly in combat, and in combat is its own kind of sphere as far as risk acceptance and all that, but just basically if you're out and not actively being shot at or shooting at someone, safety and non-combat deaths is a very, 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 very high priority to whoever's running the show. So in a situation where you have an aircraft carrier, which is a nuclear-powered death engine, when you have a potential threat on board the ship that could have random effects, like with, for instance, COVID-19, you don't know who it's going to affect. You could have 50 people get it and have no symptoms. You could have 50 people get it and 15 of them are in the hospital. If you've got 6,000 people on a ship who could all catch that same disease in a very short amount of time, you're rolling the dice that you lose all of your nuclear engineers, you're losing all of your bridge crew, that you're losing all of your medics. You don't know who you're going to lose and who you're not going to lose. And you could potentially have an extremely lethal situation over something that's basically preventable. Like you basically don't need to do it. This is where officers and NCOs are trained to raise their hand and go, yo, this is a problem, we need to stop immediately. the military is highly empowered to do that. And it's extremely unusual for them to not get permission to do that. So if this particular captain was out on the high seas, and apparently, given the lack of real pushback, it seems as though he did try to alert his bosses, who basically did not take it seriously. The encouragement that you get throughout the whole of your training is basically you need to put a stop to it, and then you need to kind of go to that next level. They never really actively would recommend you leak something to the press. That's never a thing. But certainly you're encouraged at any level to basically go to your chain of command, go to your inspector general if the chain of command doesn't work. And at some point, I've known people who've written to Congress, who've gone to their senator, who've had serious problems that were getting addressed, and you basically work your way up the system. Now, in extreme cases like that, where you're liable for again, nuclear-powered dreadnought that's one of America's most lethal weapons is floating around somewhere in the Pacific. If you have a serious problem like that, that's a career-ending move. The guy knew that he was throwing his career away, and was raised. This isn't like some rookie. You don't get to be in charge of an aircraft carrier and just roll out of bed one day and just not know how shit works. You don't know how to talk to your bosses. You don't know what's going to get you fired. No, this guy knew exactly what he was doing. So that he did it, and then the subsequent playing out of events basically shows that the system itself still is working, in that they fired him, and then his boss lost his job like 2 days later for trying to stomp on him for these reasons. Now, we can argue about the whole political aspect of that. Did he just get fired because he made Trump look bad? Well, yeah, that's a thing. That's largely why he was fired. But why? Like, why did the entire military and military adjacent community dig in their heels and suddenly turn this to be extremely unpopular? It's because we've all been conditioned over years of change from how the old military used to run to how it runs now to not accept stupid risk. And, again, if you're in combat and missiles are flying and shit's going down, okay, that's different. You take the risks, but you're trained not to take stupid risks when you're not actively engaged. Like, if you're basically just out, even if it's operational, even if, you're out, and they're patrolling the seas, doing what they're supposed to be doing. But the potential downside there is so extreme that it doesn't make any sense that he would have been ignored. And the fact that he basically went around everyone, went public, and it looks like he's going to wind up vindicated, that's a pretty damning indictment of the civilian leadership that it could get that far at all. So I think that that's one of the interesting things, as far as, you kind of get this initial pushback of, oh, so stay in the chain of command and da-da-da. Yeah, of course. That's what the chain of command's for. You want to stay within the chain of command. It's 100% designed so that problems are put into the funnel. But anyone who's ever functioned in the chain of command knows that there are situations, catch-22s, if you will, where the system itself isn't going to provide the right outcome, or it can't. Like, there's something that's gone wrong where you're not going to get an outcome that's in line with what you've been trained to do, and what is moral or ethical, or just in the better interests of the country or the people that you have that are looking to you for leadership. So sometimes the right thing to do is to get fired, and that's looks like what this guy did, and it appears that he's going to wind up vindicated. Time will tell, but I think that that's what the interesting things about how all this broke down is, that the entire community itself, kind of sniffed at the whole, well, he should have followed the chain of command. But the more that people looked at it, it turned into something very deeply unpopular, and like at a really high level and a real kind of visceral level. And you could tell by the yesterday's press conference, Trump was feeling it. He definitely realized that something had gone on, and he thought that this thing had embarrassed him. And the people underneath him are working from a different set of assumptions. I mean, they're not looking at risk so much as they're looking at political fallout of rule number one, which is that you don't embarrass Trump. As long as you don't embarrass Trump, or you make Trump look good, he'll cover for anything. But what Trump didn't realize is what was going to embarrass him and what wasn't going to embarrass him in the military community. And I think dropping the hammer on this guy initially felt like the right thing to do. And then when he saw the reaction, he's like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't have fired this fuck. So I think that's where we're at now. I think that under the review, his bosses, Captain Crozier's bosses, aren't going to come out looking very good. And I think that higher up the civilian leadership you go, especially now with Modley taking the, falling on a sword and basically resigning, it's probably likely that they're going to pin everything on him as far as, this going wrong. It probably did make its way through the Admiral food chain and up, and they decided for political image reasons, which Trump talked about. We didn't want to display weakness. We don't want to show weakness. So you don't want to tap out. But again, that runs contrary to, decades of military philosophy and change in how we accept risk in non-combat situations. So, there we go. Also, just kind of look over at this. The Art Black report. Yeah, we're not sticking with that. This is the most pretentious thing I could come up with on short notice. So as I come up with something that's even more arrogant and egotistical, I'll probably go with that. So with that, dear listeners, I'll talk to you later.